Now, the notion that this is the biggest crime the Bureau had ever investigated, the largest mass murder in American history, the two most important pieces of evidence you have, the arrest of McVeigh and the videotape showing McVeigh delivering the bomb to the Murrah building, you can't find? Incredible.
Shortly after the Murrah bombing, I was asked to duplicate approximately 400 tapes for the FBI.
There were FBI agents, or at least men in FBI raid jackets, dismantling the video cameras off the side of the building.
It didn't take much to figure out that the federal authorities weren't trying to get to the truth. They seemed to be covering up things.
They will do anything to protect themselves, and they have shown that. Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Checho, and I'm back once again to bring you, just as promised, part 2 of the Oklahoma City bombing, the truth about that event. I'm excited for part 2, needless to say. I got through a lot of information in part 1, and I'm going to try to keep the recap to a minimum, but I am going to go back over the official narrative, the abridged version, for those of you just tuning in who have yet to watch part 1. Now, let's recall. Lies require more lies on top of more lies, my friends. Keep that in mind as I read to you the official Wikipedia narrative. And mind the language, okay? Here we go. The Oklahoma City bombing was a domestic terrorist truck bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, United States, April 19th, 1995. The second anniversary of the end of the Waco siege. That is in the first sentence of the Wikipedia narrative. They want you to know that this was done as a morbid homage to the Waco siege on the part of a domestic terrorist, okay? The bombing remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history, perpetrated by anti-government extremists Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. I mean, is there even such a thing as anti-government extremists anymore? Shouldn't we all be a little anti-government and extreme about it these days? Have you been paying attention in the last 4 years? And then looked at the last 100 in the history books, the real history books? Sorry, I'm ranting already. Let me stay with the Oklahoma City bombing, okay? So that is just that. That is a very, very, very short summary of what they want you to understand about this. And I'm going to get into the nuance of how ridiculous this entire narrative is and how McVeigh was completely set up, completely patsied. I mean, he is Lee Harvey Oswald 2.0 down to the T. I went over that in part 1. I showed you how, according to his family, according to him, according to all the people who were in touch with him, he was, as far as he knew, working special services for the government as a double agent, infiltrating militia groups, right? That's what he thought his job was for. Just as Lee Harvey Oswald was told that he would be, impersonating a pro-communist, pro-Castro sympathizer, and that he would eventually, as a final mission, be sent, if he can do his job right, into the lion's den in Cuba to befriend Castro and give him a cigar laced with poison, lethal poison, which they had been developing with him at a lab in Louisiana, which is, if you recall, where Lee Harvey lived for a while. Both of these people are complete patsies. You know, they were told they were working for one set of people, and meanwhile they were being set up. And I'm going to show you how, I'm going to show you why, and I'm going to show you a lot of details. So bear with me, all right? That's the abridged version of the official narrative, which is completely nonsensical, and I'm going to show you why. So in part 1, I talked about a lot of the bomb squad and anomalies that went along with this thing. I'll recap a little of those as we go. I talked about the absurdity and completely obliterated the nonsense narrative about a 1,200-pound ammonium truck bomb being the cause for, the crater-sized entire half of the Murrah building being completely blown to smithereens. I showed General Parton's evidence and testimony. Now, as my incredible editor has pointed out, who's also a very, very sincere skeptic, very intelligent, General Parton was the most renowned and recognized figure when it came to demolitions, explosions, and these types of situations for the government at the time. The fact that they ignored his testimony speaks volumes, and he made a great point when he pointed that out to me. He never wrote a book. He never tried to profit off it. He did everything he could to bring this information to both Congress and the public, and all they did was attempt to shut him down. And the man remained in integrity. He never did anything or said anything. He just tried to get the truth out because he could see with his own two eyes that the notion that a 1,200-pound ammonium nitrate truck bomb could blow that kind of size hole in the building was pure insanity. I mean, it thumbed its nose at the laws of physics. As usual, it was completely impossible. Even as they morphed that 1,200, 2,400, 4,000, I think at one point it was like a 5,000-pound bomb. They had to keep upping it. And even that, he could see with his own two eyes that there was no way that this could have been a truck bomb because there was columns much closer to where the truck bomb was parked that were intact, and there was columns much further away that would have never been able to be obliterated by that distance of an impact that were completely blown to smithereens. And so he looked at this because they wouldn't let him near it, and of course they got rid of the rubble as fast as they could, because in that rubble, it would have been clear to anybody that the fix was in, that this wasn't a truck bomb at all, that this was a controlled demolition done with very strategic explosives in that manner. And he could see that, and he actually diagnosed and diagrammed. If you go to part 1, you can see this of my special here. You can see him, and he tells you exactly where they put the explosives. And where they had to have gone because of the blast radius. And so that's why, just like 9/11, we saw the instant and constant removal of all evidence. Same thing here. They wouldn't allow him in. They held up investigations. They did what they always do. And there was reasons for that as well. So in part 1, I started to share the absurdity of one of the first eyewitness testimonies that came out of that day was from a woman, and then corroborated by men, that when they asked, and this was a person who was in the press, I believe, when they asked an ATF agent why they were not in the office that morning, the ATF agent they were so scripted, and this was, they were trying to do their part, apparently, because the answer that he gave was they were tipped off that there was a bomb in response to what? The Waco, Texas anniversary. And that is absurd. That is ridiculous. That is, the notion that they would have known, and they would have known why. It reminds me of that. If you guys recall my specials on 9/11, I showed you a video clip of someone literally standing in the midst of falling twin towers and telling a reporter that the reasons why the towers collapsed was because the jet fuel must have got hot enough to melt the steel, and everything just, like, literally a CIA plant reciting a script. And then just like walks away briskly in too good of a mood. It's insane. Oh man, I'll try and find that clip and have my editor add it so you can see what I'm talking about.
It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks.
And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
And now we are told that there's a fire there, and that building may collapse, as well as you can.
Pictures of airplanes.
But first, let me explain what Waco, the anniversary of Waco, and why it's significant. So they wanted you to understand that this was a vengeance, an act of vengeance, a revenge terrorism act by McVeigh, because he didn't like the way the government went about handling Waco. I mean, who liked the way the government went about handling Waco? They literally created a Holocaust, an inferno, and that was done deliberately. And just to recap and rehash a little of that for you, okay? The FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, they were lead players in the mass murder of men, women, and children at the ranch, or the compound, whatever you prefer, of Branch Davidians, a community. And this was a Bible-based apocalypse cult located about 13 miles from Waco, Texas, and that was on April 19th, 1993. The Oklahoma bombings were claimed to be retaliation 2 years later to the day for what happened to the Davidians. The ranch was known as Mount Carmel, from the reference in the Old Testament to a mountain of that name, which is in Israel, aka Palestine. Authorities claimed the group were stockpiling illegal weapons, and the ATF secured a warrant to search the compound and arrest the group's leader, David Koresh, and many of the other members. If they had something on David Koresh, they could have arrested him months earlier when he left the ranch almost every single day. That's a PS, and by the way, right? So it was a debacle. It was terrible, and they needlessly, basically mass murdered these people in a show of force and complete unnecessary lethal application of these. They were doing what they always do. I wanted to just set the stage here, okay? So because when you hear about Waco, you'll have a better understanding. So let's talk about prior knowledge, my friends. Just like 9/11, this was even more, if that's possible, clear and obvious that there was absolutely prior knowledge. And that should go without saying at this point. If you're listening, if you've been following me, you probably already know that. But witnesses who spoke with the ATF agents at the scene, as I just mentioned, were told that its personnel were not in the building because they had been tipped off through their pagers not to go to work that day. These witnesses included a woman called Tiffany Bible, and she was a paramedic who was at the Murrah building within minutes of the blast. She swore in an affidavit that she found the ATF in full combat gear, which apparently takes a few minutes to put on. And I'm referring to the bomb squad. The fact that the bomb squad was literally on site before the bomb went off. You think maybe they were tipped off? And if they were tipped off and in full bomb squad combat gear, why did they allow a daycare full of children to attend school that day? Why did they not notify a single other floor or department or anybody in that building? Why? They have no reason. They attempted to deny the fact that they said this. They attempted to deny the fact that they spoke to the press telling them that they were, before somebody could say, no, you can't say that, you idiots. They told the press why they weren't in the office that day. No one told them they shouldn't. No one told them not to be there in bomb squad uniform, apparently, before the bomb went off. This was so sloppy, my friends. If you remember part one, I emphasized this over and over, how incredibly sloppy this was. And my God, it was. So after months and months of denial, even as dozens of witnesses, accumulated saying the same thing, yes, we saw the bomb squad and they were there before the bomb went off, which was weird, yeah, just a little weird, just coincidental. They were having a rehearsal. So the sheriff's department had to admit, after many months of denial by the FBI and other government agencies, that the bomb squad had been there. They did. They had to admit it. So I want to play you a clip. I'm going to share my screen with you so you understand the extent of this foreknowledge.
A paramedic who responded to the bombing, Tiffany Bible, confirms that the ATF were not in their office and, in fact, may have been aware of some type of threat that day. In this affidavit, she states that immediately after the bombing, she asked an ATF agent on the scene if any of them were in the building. He responded, "No, we weren't in there today," and that the Murrah building was bombed because of Waco. She further states that within the first 20 minutes of the bombing, she saw at least 8 ATF agents outside the building in clean black jumpsuits. To this day, the ATF has been unwilling to address their prior knowledge of the bombing. Was the ATF office empty that morning?
I asked him if I could speak with an ATF officer that worked in the building so I could find out if they knew anything about my wife. And he told me that they were in debriefing, and I asked him, I need to talk to one of them. I need to find out something. And he said that none of them had been in the building, so they weren't hurt. They'd been tipped by their pagers that morning not to come into work.
Oops.
The ATF told several different stories to explain their agent's curious absence. The most fantastic story was that 2 agents were indeed inside the building and were heroes that day. ATF agent Luke Franey claimed that he was knocked unconscious by the blast and, after an aborted helicopter rescue, crawled onto an outside ledge to escape his office. Franey reported that he then used his martial arts skills to break through several walls and injured his hand. Another agent, Alex McCauley, claimed that he was in an elevator at the time of the bombing. After free-falling for 5 floors, McCauley supposedly broke out and rescued several people.
My crews were the crews working on the Murrah building the day of the bombing. Immediately after the bombing, they called me on the radios, and at that point, they were going in to assist with, because the fire department hadn't even got there yet, they were going to check to make sure all the elevators were clear. They weren't aware, because they were coming from the south side, that the building on the north side was gone. So they went in to check the elevators, and that's when they found out how bad the damage was inside the building. None of the elevators went to free fall because the governor overspeeds were not tripped. The safety mechanisms on the bottom of the elevators were not tripped, so none of the elevators had a free fall condition. I think it was McCauley indicated that they were trapped in an elevator. So at the grand jury investigation, once I got the FEMA report that showed which elevator they were in, I said that there's no possible way they could have been in that elevator because my men checked it and it was still locked from the top, and the doors were, the wall had caved in against the doors between floors, so they couldn't have gotten out of the elevator without assistance.
Jane Graham worked in the building for over a decade, was vice president of the Federal Employees Union, and has testified before Congress on labor issues. She knew everyone in the building and bore witness to suspicious behavior that morning.
On the morning of the bombing, when my husband dropped me off and I got out of the car, as I was walking toward the entrance, there were 2 men standing directly in front of the double doors, and there was a little sitting area there, planter and so forth there in front. They were standing right there on the sidewalk. They had on ATF jackets, which said ATF on them. They were talking to a third gentleman who was dressed in business clothes. And I saw them, their backs were to me, and I thought, they don't normally, all of the people we see go up there to ATF and everything, they're never identifiable. They always are dressed, a lot of them look like drug people and other things, and, but they're certainly not dressed for you to be able to tell who they are.
Ah, really? Really? Let me explain, my friends. Do you remember the hero story from 9/11? The story we were told, the CIA play that they put out with all the ridiculous and terrible dialogue written by these people. Like, we're going to try to take back the plane. Yeah, let's do it. And then they did it so that the plane could kamikaze into the ground and leave no trace of a plane. So this is a distraction ploy. This is something they know if they can sell it, the public will focus on it. The public will look less at the insanity of the details they are trying to push and more on, well, those people, God, we're humans. We have hearts, and most of us have a lot of empathy. And when we hear people fighting against all odds, we are with them. That's why we love movies about heroes, even if in our lives, we're not the ones rooting for those type of rebellious souls. That's just our nature, and they know that, and they play on that. So 9/11, they sold a good one about the people who led the revolt against the Arab hijackers, 19 Arab hijackers. No one has ever seen them, photographed them. Anyway, my point is, So there's more than one hero story they attempted to roll out for the Oklahoma City bombing. But like I said, this was extremely sloppy. This was their first go at it. They learned a lot from this. So not only did they attempt to script these ATF agents and tell them what to say, thinking they could get away with it, not thinking so hard, obviously. And when you script something before an event as catastrophic and chaotic as a freaking bombing, you're not going to be able to know what is left standing. And, so it didn't, of course it didn't work. It didn't check out. None of these stories will ever check out because they're fabricated. I'm going to tell you about another one right now. Speaking of the FBI, and then we're going to go into MKUltra and Jolly West and what this has to do with Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing. And we're going to go, you're even going to learn about Jack Ruby, a.k.a. Jacob Rubenstein. But first, let me tell you the other hero story that they pushed. And by the way, my friends, just so you know, the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee also concluded. Now, this is not a federal committee, which, as you should know by now, federal commissions and committees that's where they send the truth to die, or to be strangled. But the Oklahoma had its own committee, its own investigation committee. And they did their due diligence, and they concluded, and I quote, "There is sufficient evidence to confirm that law enforcement agencies in Oklahoma City and Washington, D.C. had sufficient prior knowledge of the impending disaster, yet took minimum measures to avert the bombing. Documents and witnesses support this conclusion." So even an official committee is stating to you what I'm going to show you, what I've been showing you in part 1, and what I'm going to continue to show you. Now, please remember, as I mentioned, the rubble, just like the World Trade, it was quickly cleaned up, and then they demolished the building as quick as they could, right? Because the rubble would have told the tale, just like in 9/11. And they learned a lot from this incident. They were not going to take the same risks in 9/11, so they did not use the same kind of explosives. If you watch my special 9/11 Part 2, you'll understand what they did use and how effective it was at completely vaporizing all evidence of a controlled and plastic explosive detonation. That's the word I was looking for. So, but I want to finish this hero story business because this is what they do, and you know they're going to do it again at some point. Okay? Oh, here it is. FBI lies. I love this section here. So Danny Coulson, the FBI's director of the terrorist task force, told Time magazine in 1999 that when he heard about the blast, he, quote, he had driven to Oklahoma from his home in Dallas at speeds of 100 miles per hour or more to support the rescue operation and investigation. That's what he said. That's what he stated to Time magazine. In fact, Coulson checked into the Embassy Suites Hotel in Oklahoma at 12:20 a.m. on April 19th, which was 9 hours before the bomb went off. Do you understand what I just said? He didn't drive there because of the bomb. He drove there, 9 hours before the bomb went off. Inexplicably. I wonder if he knew something was going to happen. You should also know that the FBI said McVeigh's truck rental agency was tracked from a vehicle identification number, also known as a VIN, on the Ryder truck's rear axle. The axle was somehow found in the bomb crater. And this is from the mayor of Oklahoma made a press statement about this. So I'm not just making it up. And it was found 3 blocks away from the building. It must have been one heck of an axle. I mean, it sounds a lot like that Kryptonian passport that landed on the rubble, surviving the disintegration of 210-story towers. It's a lot like that, my friends. It's just insane. Okay, let me finish this. The FBI's story of the axle was an absurdly, ridiculously, easily provable lie because rear axles of vehicles manufactured in America were not imprinted with the VIN number, and the Ryder rental truck company did not add them to the axles either. So it was an inexplicable evidence plant. And as I said, You can call them intelligence agencies all you want, but, in times like this, not so intelligent, not so thought out, And what they depend on is they control the media, and eventually they will thwart the narrative, or take out the people who won't shut up about it. So McVeigh was claimed to have rented the truck with both his real ID and his fake ID. The FBI claimed this. And they had to admit shortly before McVeigh's first scheduled execution, which was postponed because of all this insanity that I'm telling you about started to leak out. He was given a few months stay of execution, but it was discovered that the FBI's star witness against McVeigh was Michael Fortier, who admitted to doing a deal to testify for the prosecution in return for lighter sentences on gun offenses he was busted for. He told the court that he and McVeigh had made themselves familiar with the Murrah building weeks before the bombing to establish the location of the ATF offices. Okay, fair enough. But if that's the case, why did McVeigh stop at a gas station in that Ryder truck that morning and ask for directions to the Murrah building? Why would he do that? Why? This has been authenticated, and this evidence is legit, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Why would he do that? How could he not imagine or know that he would instantly be recognized and reported after the bombing? In that one moment, he connected himself both to the Ryder truck and to the Murrah building. Why? If he had spent so much time scouting and locating the ATF offices, why would he? Why did he park the truck on the side of the Murrah building that was furthest away from the ATF section when he could have left it directly underneath? None of the story is logical, and none of it makes sense because it's all bullshit. Excuse me, BS. Doesn't have the same feel. I'm sorry. It's all bullshit, guys. The narrative asks us to believe that having connected himself... Now listen to this, because it gets better and better. They want us to believe that having connected himself with the Ryder truck and the Murrah building before the bombing by stopping at a 7-Eleven, McVeigh then proceeded to get away undetected in a highly visible yellow car traveling at nearly 100 miles per hour with expired license plates. This is just the worst written plot point I've ever heard. And I was a filmmaker and a producer, and I read some terrible scripts. And like the kind of stuff that I come across in this research, it just tops it all. I'm not going to lie. It's like the worst writing. So the story goes that we were told, and we were asked to believe that when he was stopped by police for a traffic violation, because that's what he was stopped for within 90 minutes, just like Lee Harvey, picked up off the street. Only McVeigh was stopped for a traffic violation. Just coincidentally, they just happened to get the man. He had just murdered, according to the narrative, 168 people, maiming hundreds more, with a bomb that he apparently, we were told, that he spent months and months making. And after that, he made no attempt at all to avoid arrest. He didn't flee from the cops. He didn't step on the gas. He didn't try to get away. He just, this highly trained soldier just pulled over, gave the cop his license, and turned himself in, never saying a thing. I mean, that's what people do, right? I mean, that makes perfect sense. Of course he did. It was just, crackerjack police work. He was arrested for a traffic offense immediately after the bombing. Okay. That's the same reason that Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in a cinema immediately after the Kennedy assassination. And it's the same patsy story. Osama bin Laden was named the culprit immediately after 9/11. These are the patsies required by the problem, reaction, solution perpetrators to hide the real orchestrators of these events. Okay. We got to talk about two more things. Very important. Okay. The first thing that we should talk about, I want to get into this, okay? This is a very little known fact. But if you go back far enough and you look at the sources and you look at the first reports filed, the very first, even though they've attempted to hide them, and you look closely, you'll find a consistency in John Doe number 2, meaning in the person who was spotted with McVeigh over and over, both, the day of, the day before, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it to you. John Doe number 2, okay? John Doe number 2, that's not a very easy way to go with the lone gunman theory, that they need to tie things up. They can't have a John Doe number 2 or 3 or 4, right? But there always is. There always is, my friends. So we're going to talk about MKUltra in a moment. But first, I'm going to fill you in on one of the lesser known aspects of this investigation. And that is, in my research for my upcoming special on the wonderful families of the Bushes and the Clintons, I came across a very interesting side note on our psychotic Luciferian former president, George Herbert Walker Bush. Let me tell you about this, because you're going to understand the Iraq-Bush connection to this bombing when I'm done. Now, most people don't know this, but President Herbert Walker Bush arranged for approximately 4,000 officers from the military and intelligence agencies of Iraq, mostly from Saddam's Republican Guard, to relocate in the United States. And 2,000 of these officers became residents in, can you guess? Oklahoma City. Or Oklahoma and Oklahoma City. Another 500 went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and Father Bush arranged for their funding, their housing, and their employment, and this was continued by Billy Clinton, his partner in crime. So, John Doe number 2, okay? Now, this was established. Jana Davis was a former reporter with NBC affiliate KFOR TV in Oklahoma, and she worked diligently, tirelessly to try to bring the truth to light about this investigation, about this bombing. And in 1996, the New York Times bought her television station and ceased all reports about this, because that's what they do. But she continued to investigate and uncover information that was completely devastating these fabrication and false narratives, right? And she established in her work that more than 70 witnesses saw McVeigh with other men, and that more than 20 of these sightings involved a report of people saying they saw a man with Middle Eastern features. A sketch of a man, this is a fact, a sketch of a man with olive skin seen with McVeigh was released by the FBI immediately after the bombing, and this was labeled John Doe number 2. Jana Davis ended up being represented by a lawyer whose name was David Shippers, and he was one of the lead investigators in the impeachment proceedings against Bill Clinton. Shippers would later go on to represent FBI agents who sued, saying that their investigations into terrorist suspects were blocked by their superiors before 9/11 went down. I mean, notice the pattern here, guys? This lawyer made a statement. He said, and I quote, "Some of these people who gave affidavits were interviewed by the FBI during the course of the investigation. They were interviewed about the second person they saw, and the agents tried to make them say that the second person was Nichols. And every single one of these people said, absolutely not. It was a Middle Eastern type individual." Now, none of these, there's 302 documents with this evidence, ever surfaced after it was buried. And Jana Davis, this reporter, credible, produced a detailed dossier and interviewed witnesses who said they would testify that they saw McVeigh with this former Iraqi soldier who lived in Oklahoma City at the time of the bombing. This man surrendered during the Gulf War, and he was resettled to the United States from a detention center, a detention camp in Saudi Arabia. On record, we know that the FBI issued an all-points bulletin immediately after the blast for a Middle Eastern-looking suspect seen fleeing the scene in a brown Chevy pickup with tinted windows and a bug shield. Fact. FBI agents seized... We're going to talk about the missing surveillance, okay? This is the next section we're going to go into. Missing surveillance. Notice the theme? I mean, can it be any more obvious when they're committing the crimes? All the surveillance footage goes missing from every place that would be relevant. Every single time. Okay? It's you know what I mean? It's not a coincidence. It's not a glitch. It's complete conspiracy. The FBI seized all security camera footage in that area, and it would have shown what happened and who was involved easily, just like 9/11, just like the airport surveillance and everything else, the Pentagon. Their excuse was that the videos were, quote, part of the investigation. But TV reporter Brad Edwards located a source who had seen parts of the videos. And Edwards presented a reconstruction for the United Kingdom's Channel 4 News of what his source claimed to have seen. And he said, and I quote, "The source said that the tapes show two men inside the Ryder truck and that John Doe wore a baseball cap. And he was taller than the man resembling McVeigh, and he had an olive complexion." And this was also supported by many other witnesses, including a man interviewed who decided to remain anonymous. In the report by Brad Edwards, he says, "I was standing in the building and I looked out the window and I seen the Ryder truck and I seen a man get out of the Ryder truck. He was olive complexion and he had black curly hair. He was wearing a baseball cap, but his curls were sticking out of his hat. It was very short in the back, but you could still see the curls in his hair. He wasn't American. He was foreign. You could tell by his skin and his face and the way his face was." So there we have a compilation of testimony. And I want to note that my friend and two-time guest David Icke was on a radio show in McVeigh's hometown in America in 2002 talking about how the FBI had refused to release this surveillance footage. And some dude called into this radio show claiming to be a former FBI agent and saying loudly that he worked on the case and there was no surveillance tapes. They didn't exist. And then another member of the public called him to tell him that not only did the tapes exist, but the FBI admitted that they existed on national television. And the FBI said in 2001 the tapes were not going to be released because of national security, which is always their go-to. So I want you to know, as we conclude one section and move into the next, the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, the ATF agents, not a single one of them was killed or harmed. Not a single one of them was in the office. Just like Lucky Larry Silverstein, they just happened to be out that day. Remind you of anything? Okay, so I want to share my screen.
And the details are chilling. We'll also focus on surveillance cameras that caught the bombing on tape, and maybe the men behind the bombing. The news channel has new information tonight that there's a chance surveillance tapes could be the smoking gun evidence. Now, we asked candid questions in a rare face-to-face meeting with ATF officials close to the investigation. We learned that video collected from downtown businesses the morning of April 19th may someday be played before a jury. Officials won't say who or what exactly is on the tape. However, numerous sources have confirmed the tapes exist and that they reveal more than one bomber.
And I said, I want two other things from the FBI. I want the tapes from the surveillance cameras leading up to the Murrah buildings on the day of the bombing, on the different buildings around the Murrah building. And I want the tapes from the cameras on the Murrah building, because I had received a government document that said surveillance cameras show the bomb detonating 3 minutes and 6 seconds after the suspects exited the truck. Suspects, not one, plural. The fight now is over those tapes. They don't deny they exist. They just say we can't find them. Now, the notion that this is the biggest crime the Bureau had ever investigated at that point in time, the largest mass murder in American history, the two most important pieces of evidence you have, the arrest of McVeigh and the videotape showing McVeigh delivering the bomb to the Murrah building, you can't find? Incredible.
The enhanced photo shows a very distinct possibility of a man standing behind that truck. And the time sequence camera took additional photographs. So will those additional photographs show there was a man there? Will they show that he was alone? Will it show it was the suspect, Tim McVeigh? The additional photographs in the trial should help point that out.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is the fact that during that first morning, while we were being held at bay from doing any recovery work, there were FBI agents, or at least men in FBI raid jackets, dismantling the video cameras off the side of the building.
I'm Charlie Rose. I'm with Legend Video Transfer. And the FBI had employed me to duplicate a number of videos for them shortly after the Murrah bombing. I was asked to duplicate approximately 400 tapes for the FBI. We had 2 FBI agents in the office. We had 2 studios set up for duplication, and each FBI agent was required to stay in the room with each of us that were in that room. Really didn't have the opportunity to sit back and watch the videos. There's probably a lot to learn, you know, from the videos that they saw. Some of them are meaningless, but others, you know, could make some powerful impact on what actually happened.
The government will not release the film that was in the video cameras on the front of the building that would show whether I was accurate or not accurate.
Of course, the other Achilles heel is the videotapes of the building itself from the different surveillance cameras that no one's seen. If McVeigh was Lee Harvey McVeigh all by himself, the lone nut with a truck, then why don't they show us the videotapes of the truck? Show us the videotapes of him getting out. Or was there more than him in the truck?
There were like 22 films in the area that were confiscated by the FBI that would have shown the truck being pulled up, people getting out of the truck. It would have shown what was going on at the time the explosions took place. And obviously they confiscated those, and it didn't take much to figure out that the federal authorities weren't trying to get to the truth. They seemed to be covering up things.
Their first objective is to protect the agency, not to do what's right, not to do justice, not to serve the American people. It's to protect themselves. And they will do anything to do that.
He got that last sentence dead on, balls accurate. They will do anything to protect themselves, and they have shown that. And in part 1, I went over and I showed you how you heard that man say the investigation was held up. Do you know what it was held up for? So that federal agents could go in. They held up the entire rescue effort. People were dying in the rubble, and they held them up. Does that sound like a familiar scenario? Do you remember Uvalde, Texas? Remember Maui? People being held up so that more people could die. This is a common theme, and I could do a whole special just on the amount of orchestration it takes to pull off these events. Anyway, in part 1, I went over this, that they held them up so that they could go in and remove the files on George Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, and Bill Clinton, and Mena, Arkansas, and the drug trafficking that went on there. $100 million a month of cocaine and heroin being brought into Mena, Arkansas. Long-standing drug running operations. All the documents were in the Murrah building. The documents which would have incriminated both Clinton and Bush were in the Murrah building. And that's one of the reasons why it was targeted. And that's one of the reasons why they literally, after they destroyed it, blew it to smithereens, they went in and they held up all rescue efforts so they could go in and make sure every single one of those files was cleared out. And that's a fact. And if you want to see why that's a fact, you're going to have to go back and watch part 1. Now let's get into MKUltra and a very sick psychiatrist known as Jolly West. Let me tell you about this dude and the long sordid history. So I also want to mention for my fellow researchers and people who love diving into this stuff as I do, in part 1, I showed a lot of testimony from General Parton, who the government hired a company called Controlled Demolition to bring down the rest of the building and take the rubble to a private landfill. And this was a site operated by BFI Waste Systems. If you look up the history of BFI Waste Systems and the history of controlled demolition, you will find skeletons upon skeletons upon skeletons, okay? The remains of the Murrah building were kept under guard by get this, the Wackenhut Corporation. Does that name sound familiar? This was one of the deep state's many private armies assembled that helped to ship chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein before the Gulf War. Donald Rumsfeld was the middleman for that exchange. Wackenhut, his name was George Wackenhut. He was a former FBI operative, and he started the Wackenhut Company with other FBI shady associates in 1954. They recruited from the FBI, the CIA, and the military, and that's who sat on the board. If you want to learn how connected this is to everything I'm talking about, there's a fantastic special on Netflix, of all places. Netflix is trying to break the mold and get back out, not just be a mainstream outlet, but it's called The Octopus Murders. It is a good series, and it will tell you all about Wackenhut and this company. And Wackenhut was a longtime friend of Papa Bush, and he funded his political campaign along with those of his son and brother Jeb. McVeigh's defense team, by the way, you should make a note, and independent explosive experts were refused access to that rubble. And I believe that was one of the reasons why they postponed his execution, and they found out the FBI destroyed 4,000 documents. It was either one of the two or both. But do you think they had something to hide? Maybe a little. Okay, MKUltra, here we come. Let me tell you about this. MKUltra, why is this important and how is it relevant? Well, if you watch the interviews with McVeigh, you'll notice that something seems to be off or missing. He won't admit, and he never has admitted that he did this. In fact, he denies it. He denied it to the end. He did claim that he was microchipped while serving with the United States Armed Forces, and that might help you understand why he would not vigorously defend himself either when he was arrested or when he was in the press or when he was. It was almost like he was brainwashed. Why would someone now not mount a defense when he couldn't have possibly been responsible for the devastation himself? Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? Once a person is in government captivity, you got to understand that the potential for mind control and perception modification is limitless with the techniques that they have available to them. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. If you guys want to understand what they're capable of, truly, just the hypnosis, just the hypnotic side of these techniques. Pick up a book called 63 Documents the Government Doesn't Want You to Read, and read the section on MKUltra that Jesse Ventura included with the only surviving documents from that program, because they torched every single one of them. They had thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of documents of the sick experiments they were doing to learn to control people against their will, to make them do things against their will that they don't even realize they're doing, and then leave them with little to no memory of how it was done. And that's why they, you see sometimes they use regression to try to get people to remember what happened because they were completely unconscious while they were in this trance doing it. And if you read those documents from that book, which you can probably find, besides that book, but that's where I found them, you'll see it's scary, man. It's scary what they can do. You will not believe what they had these two secretaries who worked for the CIA at the time do. You will not believe it. I promise you. Pick up that book. It's worth picking up just for that section. Now, MKUltra, okay? So, when McVeigh was first arrested, he was given a mental assessment, in quotes, by who? By Louis Jolyon West, a.k.a. Jolly West from the University of California. You know who else was given a mental assessment by Jolly West? Jack Ruby, a.k.a. Jacob Rubenstein, double agent, CIA, Mossad, FBI informant, well-known criminal, gangster, nightclub owner. Well-known. And after his mental assessment by Jolly West, he was declared literally insane. And he was. He went from being perfectly lucid. All records indicate there was he was absolutely up to his defense. He claimed that he did it because this man, Lee Harvey Oswald, killed one of his best buddies, a cop. from the Dallas PD, Officer Tippett, and he was perfectly lucid in that defense, right up until Jolly West spent some time alone with him. And when he walked out, I mean, did you ever see that scene in Batman where the Scarecrow goes in and talks to that one guy who's going to blow the whistle? And then he sprays him with the gas, and the guy, like, the fear gas, and the guy loses his shit, and he's like, the guy's insane, sorry. And they realize that he's never going to be able to testify or be considered sane or lucid again. You guys, the movies all come from real life. You know that, right? I mean, I'm not saying anybody dresses up in a bat outfit and does any good, but stories like this come from real places. That actually happened. That whole scene happened. I'm not saying he sprayed him with chemical gas, but whatever techniques he used, we'll never know. But he was the lead psychiatrist in the MKUltra program. He was a sick, sick man. He was one of the most notorious CIA mind controllers in American history. And he was personally heavily involved in the MKUltra program. He performed the psychic evaluation of Jack Ruby, who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, so the Kennedy assassination would not see an open court where the truth could be told. He was sociopathic. He once killed an elephant with a massive dose of LSD. Okay? Like, that should have been the end of his career, but it wasn't. It wasn't. He was promoted. They were like, this is the guy we're looking for. I mean, he was already enmeshed and in bed at that point. This is the same psychiatrist who wrote about treating Charles Manson in his book. Hello? I'm going to do a special on Charlie eventually because he didn't do any of the things he was accused of either. MKUltra. He was in federal custody his whole life from the time he was 8 years old when he was first arrested. By the time he was 12, he was already in federal juvenile penitentiaries. He spent most of his life there, and they had their way with Charlie. Charlie never had parents. His mom was, a vagabond, and she abandoned him. He was caught stealing food when he was 8. I digress. But my point is, MKUltra's fingerprints are all over everything Manson did. They're all over everything McVeigh did. So, the so-called confession from his jail cell by Terry Nichols in 2004, 11 years after the bombing, should be viewed with all this in mind. Because although his claim that he didn't know what was really going on, because just like McVeigh, he probably didn't really know what was going on. None of them actually did. They're patsies. They're people who are manipulated to take the blame for something others have really done. They're tricked, they're misled, and they're manipulated at every turn to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, thinking that they're there for a completely different reason. See Lee Harvey Oswald, my friends. Okay? So I want to share one more clip with you, and then we're going to finish this up.
So why did Tim McVeigh take the fall for his accomplices? Perhaps the intervention of a known psychological warfare expert explains his silence till the end.
The record clearly shows that Dr. Jolyon West consulted Timothy McVeigh's defense team. Dr. West had previously been psychiatrist and consulted for Patty Hearst, Saran, and Jack Ruby.
We know that Jolyon West was considered to be the #2 mind control expert in North America under only Dr. Ewing Cameron.
Dr. West came under a lot of scrutiny during his time as chief of psychiatry at UCLA because he was proposing using prisoners, the general community, poor people, minorities as test subjects. And then West's career continues to flourish through the 80s, and he continues his research into hypnosis, branches out into terrorism and cults, even consulting and later writing about the Waco massacre.
Dr. John Smith, that's even his real name, was the protege of Dr. Jolyon West, Mr. Mind Control, and he was McVeigh's doctor in prison. Today it's reported that he is one of the head psychiatrists, one of the head doctors at Guantanamo Bay. The fact that you've got the protege, one of the fathers of modern mind control, now being the head of psychiatry at Guantanamo Bay, which is an admitted mind control laboratory, that's even mainstream news. I mean, you couldn't make this up in a spy novel. Truth is always stranger than fiction, and it's all hidden in plain view.
Indeed it is, my friends. Okay. I believe that covers it. So just as we summarize and complete this special, if you go back to part 1, you'll see how it is now, without there's no more debate about it. The bomb squad was seen by dozens of witnesses to be on site before the bomb went off. You had phone calls being made to report the bombing 24 minutes before the bomb went off. You had multiple bombings that went off, and the seismic records prove that. It wasn't a single bomb. It was multiple bombs. So we have all this conflicting data. We have the hero stories that they put out that we've debunked pretty thoroughly in this special. I could get into more testimony of people who lost small children in that horrific event. And there's significance to the date as well, my friends. There's occult significance to April 19th. It's the reason why they did what they waited to do what they did in Waco. It's the reason why they did it on this day. And George Herbert Walker Bush is a practitioner of these rituals. He's a sick, sick man from a sick family. And the more you look into his family and what they're about and what they have done, the more you will have very little room to disagree with that statement. I promise you that. And I believe after we have covered everything here, that is it. And, we will list a series of sources that I used. I had a lot of help putting this together. I want to thank my team. I want to thank David Icke, whose books are one of the most incredible, detailed, well-sourced resources for this kind of information. Books like The Trigger, books like And the Truth Shall Set You Free. And there was 2 or 3 others, and I'll be sure to list those in the comments. There was several documentaries that we watched and pulled from. And so if you guys enjoyed this, thank you so much for staying with me. I am putting together an incredible special about Bush and Clinton. And there's going to be a section of that special that it has to live on my new Patreon page, because some of the information we're covering would get us in a lot of trouble. You're not allowed to talk about certain things on YouTube. And a lot of the things that George Bush has done, some of the most atrocious things that he's done, fall into that category. So if you haven't checked out my Patreon page, please check it out. We're growing a community of truth seekers. This is a page you can support the podcast and me with. And, if you are listening and you enjoyed this special, please share it. Please leave us a comment. If you're listening to this, I thank you for your diligence in listening to this information. If you want to see the visual complimentary, you'll have to visit us on YouTube or Rumble. And if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, if you could, we would a 5-star review or 4.5 or whatever you feel like we deserve. That would be incredible. We're trying to build our channel. We're trying to spread word of the work we're doing here and trying to write the history books, which have been completely twisted and fabricated, so that people can become the masters of their futures. When you're unaware of your past, it's very hard to become the master of your future. I believe that, and there needs to be a reckoning and a reconciliation between what has actually happened and what the nonsensical narratives we were fed about what happened, because those narratives have shaped this society in a way that doesn't look so good to me. I don't know how it looks to you guys, but I see a lot of strife and destruction and needless suffering and death and murder when I look out into the world. And, if I can enlighten even a few people in my lifetime and help them make better decisions for their family with the information they have, also known as informed consent moving forward, then it's all worth it. So I love you guys. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you to everyone who helped me put this information together. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Keep an eye out. We have 2 new specials coming, 2 new green screen shows. We have been tweaking that and fine-tuning the way we're going to shoot that. And we're coming out with something new that we're going to shoot this coming weekend. And my special on Bush and Clinton is going to be rocking. It's going to be rock solid. It's going to be crazy. I mean, it's so much information. It's probably going to have to be a trilogy. And if you're listening and wondering when in God's name I'm going to put out part 3, I had a comment on when I put out part 1 of this. Like, what are you doing? The comment was like, why are you doing this? We're still waiting for part 3 of 9/11. I understand some of you are still waiting, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your patience. I'm going to revisit part 3 of 9/11 right after I finish Bush Clinton. I'm knee deep in that. I'm really interested in it. It ties into everything I've been covering. And so I ask you guys to bear with me. It's coming. Part 3 is coming. I love you guys. And remember, question the answers.